All right, Chapter 7, Part 5, Catabolism. So we're going to try to take everything we've talked about so far and wrap it up and put a little pretty little bow on it so it makes sense. Metabolism uses enzymes to catabolize or catabolize, however you want to say it, organic molecules to precursor molecules that cells then use to build, right? We need to take fuel and use that fuel in order to build larger, more complex molecules. So we catabolize stuff in order to make stuff for cells. We're going to produce larger, we're produced during catabolism and needed in large quantities for anabolism are the reducing power or electrons available in NADH and FADH2, as well as energy stored in the bonds of ATP. So, the three main metabolic pathways are aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration, and fermentation. And I'll be honest with you, when I was a student and someone said aerobic respiration, I thought, oh, breathing. That's not quite what we're talking about here. So kind of wipe that from your brain. So when we talk about aerobic respiration, and we're going to talk mostly about aerobic respiration, and then we're going to talk a little bit about fermentation, and then we'll kind of explain what anaerobic respiration is. But we're going to really focus on aerobic respiration. And what that means is aerobic respiration is the way, ultimately what we're aiming for is we're taking, if we're talking about aerobic respiration in us, we're eating things in order to obtain energy. That's the whole point of eating. The energy that is obtained from the foods that we eat is then used to rebuild our cells or make enzymes or make antibodies or repair a injured part of our body. When I'm not going to get into vaccines, but when I got the COVID vaccine, I, in my head, was like, okay, I need to eat really good foods before I get this. I need to eat some green stuff and some blue stuff and some red stuff. Make sure I get a whole bunch of the really good stuff in my body. So my body has the fuel to make, in the end, the antibodies. And so we shouldn't be living to eat. We should eat to live, if that makes any sense. So, I have this weakness for these, I don't know what they're, I just know the bag, but it's like these baked, like they're healthy, cheese puffs, right? They're by Cheetos or whatever, Lay's brand or whatever. And they're terrible. They're awful. They're like such junk, but I love them. And when I eat them, I eat like a half of a bag and then I'm really embarrassed about it and like kind of shame myself that I just did that. I don't do it often, but it's a weakness because I eat them and then I have to have a Coca-Cola and it's like this best little like terrible thing to do. And don't get me wrong, I don't eat a lot of, like, I don't constantly eat really great foods. I have a habit of, going for some of the bad stuff. And, I think a lot of people are guilty of that. But what you fuel yourself with is how well your body is going to make other stuff. Okay. So if you fuel yourself with stuff that is defective, like cheese puffs, then what you make later is going to be not necessarily great. And your body will suck from the good parts in order to do what it's got to do. And so therefore you're going to have deficiencies in other areas. But so it's important to fuel your body with stuff that you need to make this stuff. But anyway, so I'm off topic a little bit. So aerobic respiration means, basically what I take away from this is that the last electron acceptor in the process is oxygen. Okay, so there's oxygen there to help this process along. Anaerobic respiration means there's something other than oxygen available at the end as the final electron acceptor. So there isn't a lot of oxygen available in this process. And fermentation is a pathway that happens when the organism either doesn't have oxygen available, or the Krebs cycle and electron transport system, these two second parts of these pathways, it's not there. It's not in that particular organism. So, there's three main pathways in order to make ATP. The whole point of this is to make ATP. You can see here there's some ATP coming off after glycolysis. There's some ATP coming off in the Krebs cycle, and there's ATP coming off in the electron transport chain or system, ETC. So, and you can see ATP is a common thread here, right? That's the whole point. The whole point of these pathways is to make ATP. The final net yield in aerobic respiration is, depending on the organism, depending on the cell, 36 to 38 ATPs. So we get the most ATPs out of aerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration, again, depending on the organism, depending on the cells, we're going to get anywhere from 2 to 36 ATPs. So not as many, in most cases, not as many ATPs as aerobic respiration. If I ask, well, I'll get to that in a second. Fermentation, 2 ATPs. Okay, so the very least is fermentation as far as yield of ATPs, yield of energy. And the most, the answer to your question, or the answer to the question, which of the three main metabolism pathways yields the most ATP, your answer will always be aerobic respiration. And then comes anaerobic, and then comes fermentation. Okay, as far as the maximum, the end result as far as how much ATP is made. All right, so you're going to see this again later because I circle back around to it towards the end here, so we'll keep going. So getting materials and energy. Aerobic respiration defined, okay, process by which organisms use oxygen to turn fuel, such as fats or sugars, and we're talking about glucose here, most of this chapter, into some sort of energy. So aerobic respiration is a series of reactions that converts glucose to CO2 and allows the cell to recover significant amounts of energy in the process. Aerobic respiration includes glycolysis and the Krebs cycle and the respiratory chain, or the respiratory, sorry, I'm having a moment here, the electron transport chain. The respiratory chain is also known as the electron transport chain, is also known as the electron transport system. So don't let that confuse you, the differences in terms. So aerobic respiration includes glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the respiratory chain, or electron transport chain, ETC. Aerobic respiration relies on oxygen as the final electron acceptor. So if I ask you what is the final electron acceptor in aerobic respiration, your answer would be oxygen. And it is characteristic of many bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and animals. So meaning aerobic respiration is something that bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and animals do. Many of them do, or have the ability to do. Anaerobic respiration defined, type of respiration through which cells can break down sugars to generate energy in the absence of oxygen. So anaerobic respiration used by strictly anaerobic organisms and others who are able to metabolize with or without oxygen involves the same three pathways: glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the ETC, but does not use oxygen as the final electron acceptor. because it's not available. Electron or oxygen is not available in that one. Fermentation is basically, it says it's an additional pathway, but it's an alternate pathway, I'd like to say, that allows organisms to not fully or partially break down glucose without oxygen. So under anaerobic conditions, it's the incomplete oxidation or the incomplete breakdown of glucose. During fermentation, oxygen is not required. And there are organic compounds that are the terminal acceptors in this process. So I'm going to stop this here and I'll pick up hopefully the last component of this chapter.